Hey, Hannah Mouse 1 here. Welcome to another devlog for A Farmer's Life, the farming game that I'm making in Scratch. In this video, I'll be implementing an idea that I received from a member of the community, Fertilizer. This is something that I actually considered adding in with the animals update, but I decided against it because I really wanted to get that update out to you guys. But because you said you wanted it, I decided that it was about time. But first, there are a few tweaks that I needed to make, things pointed out to me since the animals update. First was that the description for the furnace still mentioned being able to make bread, which is no longer accurate, and the other is that pickling veg actually didn't do anything for the price because it had 5 times the value, but requires 5 of whatever veg to make. So I fixed that before jumping into adding a new workspace, the compost heap. This will convert another new item, plant waste, into compost, which will speed up crop growth times. As I mentioned, the fertilizer addition was a recommendation from the community, so thanks and a shout out to Sean Esperon, hope I'm pronouncing that right here on YouTube. But for this compost heap, I needed to make an item with the collision and overlay masks so it fits with my pixel perfect tile collision system, and I needed to create an icon for it for both the hardware store and the inventory, a description of the workspace for the hardware store, as well as the inventory icons for other new items, plant waste, which will drop when crops are harvested or destroyed, the aforementioned compost, and manure, which will increase a crop's yield. I added these into the item index, added them to the inventory page onto their appropriate tabs, and created labels for each of these new items. I then integrated this into some of the existing systems, making it so that plant waste drops when crops are harvested or destroyed, making it so that you can place the compost heap, open it, and craft the compost. This was all super easy because of how modularly I'd set all of this up before. I then made the art for the placed fertilizers, both the compost and the manure. The ability to display this over the tiles without an extra set of clones is a super important benefit of the paint-based tile system that I set up a little while ago. And I then made it so that you can place the compost with it displaying correctly. It needed to be destroyed if the tilled ground is pickaxed, and I made it so crops grow faster if on composted ground. And I had to stop the crop from pulsing when on composted ground, as I was using the same list to store fertilizer information as I did for whether or not a workspace contains an object. Now onto the other type of fertilizer, manure. This will be collected from animals. For this I created a new tool, the shovel, which required an icon for the hotbar and for the bar shop. It also needed a description for the shop, and I got all of that displaying as appropriate. Oh, and from here, if you might notice me repeating some of the code, my computer crashed at one point and I lost a little bit of progress. I then had the delightful task of creating the art for the animal poops before implementing the mechanics surrounding manure. I needed these to appear in the barn over time if you had the animals to produce it, and purchased the shovel required to collect it. And I made it so that you can collect the manure with said shovel. I also needed to make it so that you can place it in the same way as the compost. However, in this case, instead of increasing growth speed, I made it so that it increases the yield. One request that cropped up a few times in the last playtest was people wanted to be able to expand the farm area, and while I don't have any plans to do that in the imminent future, between fertilizers and the new upgrades in the research lab, people should be able to make more effective use of the space that they do have, which I hope might mitigate the issue. Speaking of research, I made a bunch of research options for the fertilizers. There are 5 in total. Overgrown, which increases how much plant waste you get from destroying or harvesting crops. Compost efficacy, which increases how much the plant growth time speeds up when compost is used. Manure efficacy, which increases how much a plant's yield increases when manure is used. Stinking feeling, which aside from having the best name out of any of them, increases how much manure animals produce. And finally, fertilizer fortitude, which means that there's a chance for fertilizer not to be used up on each harvest. These all needed icons, labels, descriptions, and to be added to the upgrade index and cost lists. And then I had to go through and actually implement the effects behind each upgrade. And this was where I started to really notice how much work I'd lost in the crash, which was super annoying and resulted in me having to redo a bunch of stuff, but it's so much faster to repeat things than to do them the first time, so it wasn't too bad. Now for some quality of life improvements, starting with inventory descriptions. I realized that I needed a way for the player to identify what each fertilizer does, so I made a little tagline for each of these, and while I was at it, I added description for each of the fishing baits so that the player can easily identify which ones are better or worse without having to guess or physically experiment with each of the nets. And in the spirit of giving the player useful, or some would argue necessary, information, I also created a bit of UI to tell the player what tiles items can be placed on. Then I moved on to the polish elements to prep me for the next public build, starting with the save load system. Updating this is always a bit taxing, especially as I try to make it as backwards compatible as possible, meaning that load codes from previous versions should, emphasis on the should, work in this new version. Fingers crossed anyway. Other than that, I added in a couple sound effects, added the new NPC Felix to the start screen, and updated the project thumbnail. From here, I've got a lot of playtesting and bug fixing to do to get this out to you, hopefully before Halloween. So I'm going to dive into that, but otherwise, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you did. It lets me know if there's something you want to see more of. Check out the game or join the Discord, both linked in the description down below, and I'll see you next week with another video. Bye!